And hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us on Gabbing About Gardening. Lovely to see you all as we enter the fall season and start to get ready to plant our garlic. So lovely to see you. We'll give everybody a few more minutes to get landed. Our guest teacher is Arzeena Hamir, and we are gabbing about growing garlic this evening. Thanks so much for doing this, Arzeena.
My pleasure. Yay. Nice to see so many faces and see some gardeners too.
Yeah, it's a nice turnout, and I think we're going to get lots more as people realize that it's almost 7 o'clock. They will want to be a part of this. And we are recording, so if you have friends who didn't make it to this live session, please remind them that they can check us out on Facebook. We also have our YouTube channel where we feature our guest teachers. Welcome again. This is Gabbing About Gardening. This is our first session for the fall season. We've taken quite a break throughout the summertime. And we are back now. Gabbing About Gardening has a variety of programs I'm going to tell you about just really quickly. Obviously, this one, which is our gathering for gardeners, Gabbing About Gardening's Zoom gathering for gardeners. And this is our opportunity to actually see each other, wave at each other, and hear one another's voices, see one another's faces, share what's been going on in our gardens. And we're planning to do this once or twice a month. And this evening's guest is Arzeena Hamir. I'll do Arzeena's official introduction in just a minute. I just want to make sure that the sound is okay for everybody. Is everybody hearing okay? Great. Thanks for that thumbs up, Ellen. Please remember to mute yourselves until we start to have our discussion. Arzeena is such a pro that she invites your questions as we go along. And would you please type your questions in the chat box? I will manage them for Arzeena because she will be focused on her PowerPoint slideshow presentation, Gabbing About Gardening. Hi, Erin and little one. Lovely to see you. Type it in and I will make sure that it gets spoken out loud. If you want to speak to Arzeena directly, just put up your hand or unmute yourself and let us know that you have a question you'd like to speak. So Gabbing About Gardening has been going since, I guess it was January. We started up on January 4th. We had a lovely community growing, including all of you. Thank you so much for being here, for spreading the word, for staying connected by Facebook, Instagram. We have our YouTube channel where all of our garden teachers can be seen, and you can watch all of the Gabbing About Gardening Zoom gatherings for gardeners throughout the year whenever you want to pick up on it. So Gabbing About Gardening is entirely based on donations. We don't ever charge any money. Some of you are exceptionally generous, and many of you donate, and any donation is considered generous and so greatly appreciated. We are hoping to spread the virus of gardening. We want to really infect people with our joy for gardening, and this is one of the ways that we do it. I'll pop our email address in the chat box. And if you would like to contribute to our Gabbing About Gardening programs, which include these gatherings on Zoom, and also we have a regular podcast and radio show, which is also available through all of the podcast platforms now. So we're really dedicated to spreading the message of gardening, and you are helping us do that. Thank you so much for being here. That's enough of the commercial. Now, about Arzeena, oh my gosh, I really don't know where to start and where to end sometimes. Arzeena is the greatest inspiration I have personally in gardening, because whenever I am stumped with a gardening question, my first thought is, let's ask Arzeena. And if she doesn't know, which hasn't happened yet, but I know she knows where to find out. Arzeena Hamir is an agronomist. She is an organic gardener in the Courtenay area. She's very active politically. She is the regional director, representative for the Comox Valley Area B. She's recently joined Farmers for Climate Solutions. And Arzeena is always advocating for farmers, and she is especially dedicated to helping young farmers and young people learn about gardening and farming. And this evening, we are blessed to have Arzeena gabbing about growing garlic. Again, if you have questions as we go, just drop them into the chat box or let us know. If you'd like to speak your question yourself, you're so welcome to. We have 43 people so far, Arzeena, and I think we're going to get quite a few more coming in the next few minutes. But let's get this party started, shall we?
Let's do
Arzeena,
it. Thanks so much.
thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lou, for that lovely introduction, and welcome to everybody on Zoom. I know it's difficult to kind of gather at this time, but Zoom allows us. I hope you're all comfortable, maybe even in your pajamas if you want to be, so that you're able to listen and absorb in a comfortable way. Please, if you want to turn off your video, that's totally fine. If you need to get up and stretch at any time, you have full permission to do that. And as Lou said, when I do the presentation, I really encourage you to ask your questions when they pop up, because waiting till the end can sometimes mean like losing the slide that kind of has made that question pop up. And probably if you have the question, so many others do as well. So I love answering it as I go along. I notice, or I recognize a few names in the crowd, so I know a few of you, but I don't know most of you. And I would love to hear what your experience so far has been with growing garlic, especially if you've had any issues in the past, because I want to make sure that you come away from this this Zoom call with at least some ideas and some tools in your toolkit of how to deal with any issues that come up with growing garlic. So whether they be like your garlic's been small, or you're not sure about the varieties, put anything, type them in the chat. And the chat is that little icon in the middle of the bottom of the screen. You can type them in there, and I'll be able to read them as we go along. Or if you're just more comfortable, unmuting yourself and just asking your question at the time if I don't cover it in the presentation. So I'm going to begin my screen share, and I'll just, when I do that, it's a little bit hard for me to see people. I only have a few windows that are open with people's faces and names. So sometimes if you're, trying to ask a question with just raising your hand, I might not see it. Hopefully Lou maybe, but there is an option, like if you scroll up to your window where you see your name, there's 3 little dots there. And if you click on that, there's often a place for you to say chat or to raise your hand. So that will usually allow me to see that your hand's up and that you're wanting to ask a question.
And I'll keep a good eye out as well, Arzeena.
Super, thank you. Right. So honestly, put in any questions that you may want to make sure that you get answered today, and then we can tailor the talk specifically to meet the needs of the folks that are here. So a little bit about my garlic growing experience. I've been growing garlic for probably about 20 years now. 10 here in the Comox Valley and 10 in the Lower Mainland. And so I've had some time to kind of gain experience in what works, what doesn't work, how you get big, fat, juicy garlic, how you get total crop failure, which has happened actually many times. This year particularly was very hard and we'd had lots of losses. So as much as I kind of like to think of myself as a garlic guru, sometimes garlic just needs to humble you and bring you down a few notches because, like I said, there can be years where you think you've done everything right and Mother Nature throws these curveballs at you and you just have to take a deep breath and say, okay, I will try that again. So I love growing garlic. It was and has been my favorite crop to grow. It was the first crop that I grew when we moved to our farm here in the Comox Valley. So hopefully the experiences that I have had will translate to where you're growing, whether it be here in the Comox Valley, or I know folks are zooming in from across BC as well. So let's get on with it. So why would you even want to grow garlic? You may have noticed that garlic is pretty cheap in the supermarket. I've seen it 3 for $1. It's not an expensive crop if you're buying from Superstore or someplace like that. Garlic itself can take up space in your garden for a very long time, 9 months. So why would you even want to give up your valuable real estate in the garden for so long? It is a nutrient hog. I like to call garlic the princess crop. It needs a lot of nutrients, doesn't play well with others, so needs to be treated with a little bit of careful handling, like a princess. So that is something certainly to keep in mind. But, and there's lots of buts there's a few on the negative side. The garlic that you generally see in the supermarket, especially when it's at that price of 3 for $1, will most certainly be coming from China. China is one of the world's largest growers of garlic. And from my understanding of how the way garlic is grown in that country, there are some questionable practices around what is applied to the garlic during the growing season. The labor practices that are used in the harvest and the processing of garlic. So something to keep in mind that when you are putting your money towards a practice like that, that's really something that supports that practice continuing. And then what I found is that the flavor of local garlic is so much better than the imported supermarket garlic. Often I find like a single clove of your own locally grown garlic will have just as much flavor as a whole bulb of store-bought. There's something to be said about growing it locally. The types of garlic that we can grow are generally way more diversified than what store-bought, especially the white silver skin garlic, which tends to be one of the least flavorful garlics. So if you like pungency and really strong aroma, generally you won't get that from store-bought garlic. For my farm and when I was growing in the Lower Mainland, if you've got a good good soil with a lot of compost and a lot of nutrients, I find that garlic generally doesn't have to be irrigated. And that's such a bonus for me because I can put my attention to other crops that need more watering and need more handling. Once garlic is in the ground and it's mulched nicely, generally I walk away from it and then come back to it at harvest time, really. So that's such an extra bonus if you have a lot of other things going on in your garden or on your farm. So a few things to know about garlic. It is in the allium family. So understanding that it shares the same family traits as onions, as chives, as scallions, shallots, leeks, especially. It's quite closely related to leeks. Means that sometimes if you do get diseases or pests, it can travel between those family members. So what's important to know about that is once you start to grow garlic, it's really important to have a good rotation in your garden so that you're not planting the allium family within 4 years, if that's possible. So wherever the garlic's going to go in your garden, it's going to be, 4 years before garlic is there again, or any other allium. There are certainly diseases like rust that will travel between, for example, garlic and leeks. So you want to break that disease or pest cycle by planting something else, something not in the allium family, beans, potatoes, lettuce, kale. Any of those crops are from other families. They don't share the same diseases and pests, and it will just break that cycle for you. Garlic itself also needs a minimum of 3 months of cold temperatures in order for you to get proper clove development. Now, I don't know if you remember 2010 during the Olympics year. We had an unusually mild winter time. If you remember, the Olympics had to bring in all that fake snow because there was no snow on the mountains. Interestingly, I found that my garlic that year did some very funny things because it didn't get enough of those cold temperatures. Some of it turned into a soft neck. It was kind of odd things started happening. Where it's more important, though, is for you to know that if you miss the planting window between now and I would say probably the end of February, if you want to plant garlic in, say, March or April, sometimes what can happen is when you plant your clove of garlic, you will just get a single uni clove, like a bulb that doesn't have, that's more like an onion than it is a garlic with separate cloves inside. So just know that garlic needs to be planted through the winter months in order for it to properly trigger the cloving practice that allows you to multiply the garlic. Basically, some people I know purposely grow their garlic late in the winter time or in the early spring, so they get those uni-cloved garlic. It can be a bit of a culinary treat, but in general, most of us want to see the multiplication that happens when you plant a single clove and you get a full bulb that has 4, 5, 6 or even more cloves inside. So that requires you to plant in the winter months. And then lastly, I mentioned this already, garlic is a heavy feeder and does really need a really good supply of nutrients in order for it to grow big and fat and juicy the way a lot of people like their garlic. So Michelle, hi Michelle, nice to see your face and your name anyway. So question?
Hi, I'm wondering, so I'm starting to work with my dad to grow garlic in Quesnel, which is zone 5A. And I'm just wondering, what time of year do you recommend planting up there? Would it be fall as well?
It would be. So thanks for the great question. I've seen garlic grown in 5A before. There are a lot of growers of garlic in Alberta as well too. So, your parents are in really good company. here's the thing that I've noticed, and here's the difference. Even Michelle and I know each other from Richmond days. And when I grew in Richmond, I was able to plant my garlic in mid-September, even sometimes early September. And it would be like at least 3 to 4 inches high by about Christmas time. And then come spring months when, the weather started getting better, it would just take off and, beautiful. When I did that here in the Comox Valley, where we often get temperatures at my farm, at least, easily -9, and often we will get to -15. The little bits that were up above the mulch or above the soil layer would get hit very hard by frost, and they would often die back, which kind of set the plant itself back a few months. It put all that energy into sending out a shoot above the soil level, and then gets hit by that hard frost, and then it goes kind of backwards. So what I've done is delayed planting until mid to late October. And it means that I actually don't get shoots before Christmas time, which is what I want to see. So I'm assuming it would be very similar for anyone in northern climates like Quesnel, Prince George area, is you don't want to see growth above the ground before the spring starts really coming in, and risk of a hard frost has passed. So later planting, as long as you can work the ground still, I would say, Michelle, like if it's getting so cold that you can't really work the soil, then, you've kind of passed the time. You don't want to be miserable when you're planting garlic. So there's probably a sweet spot that your parents know that it's after this time, it's just, we can't get into the field. It's too wet and soggy, or the ground is frozen solid and I can't, plant into it. So that's probably the timing where you want to get your garlic in right before. I hope that's sort of helpful. But I think if you followed a few growers from Alberta area, their timing would probably be a lot closer to what you'll need. Hope that's helpful. Any other questions before I go on for timing?
There are a couple of questions and comments. Would you like to hear some of them, Arzeena?
Absolutely.
Okay, Patty is saying, I had 10% rot in my 105 heads this year. New bed, maybe too much organic material. We appreciate your info on controlling rot.
Okay, I can answer that. And then the other one?
Maggie is saying, my garlic was smaller this past year and didn't show that it sprouted until end of February, even though it was planted end of October the year before. The year before it came up in November and it was big and beautiful. Patty has added to her question about rot and saying maybe 10% is acceptable. Maggie is saying that she had very small wire worms too, and lots of split garlic this season.
Okay, great. I'll answer, a little bit of that first, and then we'll go probably the wireworm and a few of the other questions I'll take at the end as we're kind of coming into some of the problems, and the splitting garlic. I too had fairly high losses due to rot. And what I think happened, and let's go back to what this year was. We had, if you remember, a very, very wet spring. I just remember it, I called it the slug apocalypse because everything was getting inundated by slugs. My asparagus, all my greens, we were constantly so it was cold and wet. And then all of a sudden the oven turned on and we had this incredible heat dome that took us to 39 degrees. So if you can imagine, wet and then all of a sudden turned on heat is a perfect ingredient for fungus and rots to flourish. They love warm and wet. And we kind of gave it to them at that end of June. And then the previous year, in 2020, we also had 3 weeks of rain into July. Because I remember garlic harvesting was happening in the rain. And the garlic itself was wet and heavy. And we, at least at our farm, had a really hard time drying it down. So I think what happened is the compounding of the 2020 wet year and either your own garlic or any bought garlic that was grown in this region was already kind of wet on the wet side, didn't get dried down properly. And then 2021 also being very, very cold and wet in the springtime. It did a lot of the garlic in. Garlic, there's very little that actually goes after garlic. Wireworm will try and poke little holes in it, but the garlic is so pungent that it tends to repel them. But fungus is the one thing that will take garlic out. And not having garlic dry down properly after harvest, I'm finding this was our first time to ever see that happen, is one of the key reasons that we think we lost garlic this year, is it didn't dry down properly. It probably harbored a bit of fungal spores from all the wetness. And then this year, when again we had a wet year, it kind of did the garlic in. So this is the humbling part about growing garlic. Sometimes you think you've got the biggest, like the best garlic. The other thing I found, and Lou will laugh at this because we were just talking about growing big fat heads. If you can believe this, I think we grew our garlic too big. Does that make sense to everybody? The cloves were like, we can grow very, very large garlic here. I mean, cloves this size is not unusual for us in the soil type that I have, which is a loam soil. And, Michelle and Richmond, if you've got clay soil, that kind of soil holds both moisture and nutrients really well. And it really helps to grow very fat garlic. But there obviously is a tipping point, which we must have passed, where when the cloves are so big and fat, they're harder to dry down. And it compounded the effect of having those 2 wet seasons. The garlic itself was just too juicy and didn't store and dry down properly. So sadly, we've learned that lesson now, and we're probably going to sell off the really, really big garlic and plant more medium-sized garlic heads. I know, isn't that odd? But here's what I'm seeing is like the change in the climate which is kind of exacerbating these wet springs, is forcing me to grow seed or use seed that's slightly smaller than when I was thinking and was getting used to. So hope that wasn't too technical for folks, but yeah.
I don't think it was too technical, but really good information, Arzeena. And yes, I concur that I had a very similar problem. Could I voice for James that he grows a lot of elephant garlic. Some of the elephant garlic only produced single clove bulbs. Is there a reason for this?
Yes. So, I mean, I think it might have been, the timing. I'm not sure, James, if you can sort of remember when exactly you planted your garlic and whether it got enough of that cold temperature in order for the cloves to form. Like anything probably planted past December, I'm trying to think when we got our frosts. I think they came early last year. We didn't get too many late frosts. So maybe, timing was probably I'll say it's often the main reason why you only get a single clove is the timing of planting.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I did plant them at the end of October. And I'm here in Vancouver. So Vancouver, I mean, our winters are not generally cold. It didn't seem like it got really cold until, I don't know, December. And then again, maybe in late January, February.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing with climate change, right? Oh my gosh. I think it's, the milder, wetter winters is not going to be great for growing good garlic. Almost Michelle's parents up in Quesnel may have an up on us now, those of us that are in the southern part of the province. That's generally the only reason where I see that garlic itself doesn't clove properly is it's a temperature trigger. Sometimes if they're competing with, I don't know if your garlic was spaced and had enough nutrients. Sometimes nutrient stress will also cause it to not form cloves properly. So maybe, by the end of the presentation, if that isn't answered for you, like we'll come back to you, James, and see if there's anything that hasn't triggered of maybe this could have been why. I hope that's helpful.
Sure. If I could just say this, and that is the spacing was 6 inches. I had tons of nutrients in the soil. And I questioned whether or not I should have put the garlic into the fridge a few weeks for, 2-3 weeks prior to planting.
Is that what you did? Or are you thinking?
I didn't, and I'm thinking of doing it this year as a split test.
Yeah, I would try that actually. That's kind of what I was thinking in the back of my mind. Like, what else could you do to ensure that you get that cold fertilization that garlic needs? And that's actually what a lot of growers in southern climates do, is they cold treat their garlic before planting. So yeah, that may be a necessity. Try it if you have that. If you still have time and you haven't planted all your garlic, see if that makes a difference. I'm wondering too if elephant garlic, being that it's not a true garlic, it's a leek, and so perhaps the seed source itself might also be something maybe not coming true as an elephant garlic. I don't know. I don't grow I've not really grown a lot of elephant garlic. So maybe let me think about that and see if there's anything else that triggers. Yeah. So
Arzeena, can I ask?
Yep, go ahead.
Elaine's commenting that she's grown garlic in the Yukon in early October, and as the ground starts to freeze this month, and she needed to plant deeper and mulched it more heavily. I think I'm reading that correctly. I've grown garlic in Yukon in early October as the ground starts to freeze this month. Needed to plant it deeply and mulched heavily.
Yes.
You want to comment on that?
No, that's perfect.
It's good.
That sounds like
Okay.
exactly what you want to do. You need to get your garlic in before the ground freezes, and mulching. Yes. And we'll talk about all of that as the Zoom call progresses, but that's exactly what you want to see. And in those areas where you do get very heavy, hard frosts, having mulch is really important, not just as a weed control, which is what I use it for, but also to protect the garlic from the heaving that can happen when you have a deep frost that goes down into the soil. Many of the bulbs that you plant can get pushed up closer to the surface, and that's where they become susceptible to themselves freezing, which is not what you want to have happen. So yeah, no, that's perfect.
Great. And then Jeannie in Alert Bay asks, what would my zone be in Alert Bay and when should I plant garlic?
I think you're probably 7A or 7B. I'm not 100% sure. But most of Vancouver Island is the same zone, like at least north of Nanaimo. I don't think there's much of a difference there. Yeah. I don't know, Lou, if anyone else has
so plant in mid-October, late October?
Same as
okay.
us. Yeah.
Okay, Jeannie. And then James also had another comment here in the chat box. What do you recommend for garlic fungus when the bulb is white and has fungus on it? And the bulbs at harvest are the size of the tip of my finger and are rotten. Oh, I cry when that happens.
Yeah.
I believe the fungus is sclerotinia.
Yeah.
And how do I correct the soil?
You can't. Oh, I'm sorry to hear. This is the nightmare of all garlic growers, I'm sad to say, is it sounds like white rot. And that is a rot that is extremely long-lived in soil. So first and foremost, find a new place to grow garlic. You won't be able to plant garlic in that soil for a very, very long time. So start from brand new seed stock. Don't use any of your own saved seed. If you had that fungus this year, all of your tools or anything that went into that soil, including your boots, try and sterilize it all and make sure you don't have movement of that soil into any new planting areas. So E, I'm really sorry to hear you got that. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but this is primarily it travels on seed that you're getting in from other areas. Like once you have your own seed supply and you've got a garlic and you get a really good crop, try not to buy more seed in. This is the big risk that happens. When you save your own seed and you know it's clean, this is how you prevent other diseases from coming in. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's always sad, isn't it? What are your favorite medium-sized heads? Michelle wants to know. Do you have a favorite?
As in variety?
Yes.
My favorites here are Susan Delafield, which I'm now learning is actually a music. So this is a funny thing about garlic. It can get renamed into many different things. So Susan Delafield / music as the white porcelain garlic and red Russian. Those two grow very well for me in my soil and in my climate. I remember in Richmond, Yugoslavian did really well, as did Spanish Roja and Persian Star. So, once we'll get into it, the garlic kind of numbers and varieties, it's amazing. It's amazing. But I do want to point out, because we've put out some terms that maybe not everybody knows: elephant, hardneck, softneck. And so I just wanted to describe that there are 3 main types of garlic. There's what's called a softneck, where there's no, the neck or the stem of the garlic is soft and pliable. You can grate it. There's a hardneck that forms a very hard stem in the middle of it. And although you can't grate it, you do get what are called scapes from it. So that's a second kind of harvest from the crop. And then there's elephant garlic, which we talked about with James, which is generally you get very, very large bulbs from. So softneck is also called silver skin. Sometimes that term is used interchangeably. So the garlic that you generally see in the supermarket is a silver skin or a softneck garlic. And the reason for that is that this is the type of garlic that stores the best. That stem, the hard neck in the other varieties, means that the wrapper leaves that are around the clove don't close. And, whenever you don't have a tight, strong wrap around your bulb, it means that those bulbs often don't last quite as long. And so softneck is the best type. If you want to grow garlic year round and have fresh garlic year round, you will want to grow at least one type of softneck, and then the others hardnecks or whatever. The softneck is the type that generally won't sprout in April and May when the other hardnecks do. So having a combination of both is a good idea. The thing about softnecks is they tend to not have as strong a flavor. So the hardnecks have a more pungency to them. Softnecks, not so much. Yeah. Michelle, did you have another question or?
Yes, sorry. I'm curious, what are your favorite softnecks for braiding? I think I've used Susanville a few times, but I didn't find the stalk very good for braiding.
No. So it's a hardneck. If you even got to try and braid a hardneck, that's a job. It's
okay.
You can
maybe
only
I have the wrong one.
Yeah.
Listed.
So, I in the past had grown Nootka Rose, and I have grown Italian softneck, but quite frankly, I am very, very bad at growing softneck garlics, and I'll explain that reason why in a bit. But I don't have generally a lot of success growing softnecks. I think the sharing farm at Terra Nova grows some beautiful varieties, and if whatever they're growing, I would grab and try and grow that. If anyone else has some ideas of good softneck varieties, put them in the chat too. It's always great to sort of share that kind of information. Yeah, so that's my deal. So as I mentioned, hardneck garlic grows these beautiful scapes, and that's the term for the flower that comes out of the top of the garlic in about June time. It's the stem that forms this curly Q, and that's the part that is delicious, juicy, can be used as an early, supply of garlic flavor. Pickles really well. I love barbecuing it or pan frying it. Has the texture of either like asparagus or green beans, but with this beautiful, strong garlic flavor. Scape pesto is another favorite sort of way of using that. But as I mentioned before, having that neck up the middle of the plant and through the bulb means that the hardnecks don't store. And by don't store, I mean, like, you will still have garlic till March. I mean, that's not bad, but it's not past March. They tend to be the first that start to poke up green. They start to shoot up in the spring months. So they don't store quite as long as the silver skins. So, yeah. And then elephant garlic, as we mentioned, not a true garlic. The flavor is much milder, but as you can see in the photo, you get these giant bulbs, which are fantastic for baking, if you want to make a garlic spread or something like that. So yeah, that's another choice. I've not grown a lot of elephant garlic. Some of them, Susan Delafield, that I've grown have formed cloves this big. So I generally try and just grow a lot of hardnecks at my place. So that's what grows the best for me. Okay.
You're getting lots of agreement about the size of the garlic. Sue Lynn Cedar, who's a really good garden teacher here on Quadra Island, is agreeing. And a couple of other people. And Kate Saunders in Powell River says she is finding the same problem in curing the big bulbs, and she's switching to medium and smaller ones as well. And a question about shelf life, which is kind of about shelf life, but mainly the question is, how many years can you continue to grow from your own stock? In other words, do you need to buy new stock every few years for planting? That's a great question.
Good question. I think, if you maintain good sanitation, you're not bringing in diseases, you dry down your garlic well after harvest, you should never have to buy garlic again for planting. It's adapted to your soil. If you choose the best disease and blemish-free bulbs for planting, you should not have to replenish that. Like, that will be some fantastic garlic, so well suited to your own area. So yeah, that's the nice thing about it. Garlic does adapt over time to the conditions that it's being grown in.
That's great news. Thank you for that question, Ellen. That's a great question. James is saying, back to the idea of putting garlic in the fridge to cool it off, that he'd heard of some people putting cloves in soil in a bag and putting the garlic in the freezer. What are your thoughts on duration of time for the garlic to be in the freezer if he uses that method?
I wouldn't use
not in the freezer, in
the fridge. Yeah. I think 3 weeks is what growers in California do. 3 weeks of cold in the 4 degrees or around that area. You don't want the garlic to freeze, so just be careful it doesn't, if there's a cold spot in your fridge. But yeah, 3 weeks is generally what it would take to, if you're scared of that single bulb forming again, or if you're late planting this fall, you don't get your garlic in the ground, put it in the fridge for about 3 weeks. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to go again over like the different types and why you would choose some over the other. So, if you like having year-round garlic, having it through the summer months, especially, this is where your silver skin's going to shine and be great. If you like braids as well, having that, either selling that off of your farm or providing that to friends and family, again, silver skin. The rock and bowl are also, that's another name for hardnecks. Those are the ones that have the more pungency. Some of them even very, like they verge on hot, like you cut a garlic and put it on your tongue and it's like so spicy. That's in the rock and bowl or hardneck types. But again, non-braiding and will last until about March-ish. And then lastly, elephant for size, having those huge bulbs is generally, they do store well because they don't have generally a neck in them as well. So that's another option. If you're looking for a storage garlic, then choose either a silver skin or an elephant. Now, I just want to talk about before planting and choosing a site in your garden for planting garlic. The books that I see that, garlic loves roses, or some of the ideas of using garlic is spread out through your garden to do some pest repellent. That's awesome. And it does have those qualities of repelling certain pests. But what I found is growing garlic like that doesn't give you the best quality bulbs. Garlic really needs its own space and its own conditions, because what happens is if it's in amongst your roses, your other plants, your other vegetables, first of all, garlic does not compete well, doesn't like sharing space. It has a very shallow root system. So other plants very easily outcompete the garlic for nutrients. The other thing is garlic also needs the water to be shut off in June. Like you need it to start drying down so that it's ready for harvest come July. And having it beside your rows that you need to keep watered, or by other plants that need that irrigation, means that you can, interfere with that drying down process. So choose a spot, and this is my recommendation, that is only for garlic, and then allows you to do rotation, because that's the other thing about interplanting. It makes rotations very complicated. Garlic really needs to be in full sun. It is, like I said, that princess crop, all of the energy that's going into building those big fat bulbs requires sunlight and photosynthesis and sugars to be, added into the plant. Here's something I didn't explain. Garlic cloves are actually not the root of garlic. They are a swelling of the stem, the bottom of the stem. So it's actually, the bulb is attached to the leaf, which is another reason why garlic needs full sun. The leaves need to be photosynthesizing really well and, accumulating all of that energy, because it's really the leaves that push all those sugars down to make the bulb. So having full sun is really important for garlic. Helps to also fend off, like if you've got shade at certain times of the day, that's where you get an accumulation of moisture, which can lead to certain diseases. So having it in full sun is really important. Now, at least in the Lower Mainland and on Vancouver Island, where we have heavy rainfall through the fall, winter, early spring months, I really recommend that either you mound your soil to raise it out, at least lift it up a little bit from ground level, or grow in raised beds. And the reason for this, I mentioned earlier, is that very little kills garlic except, rot. Having the roots sit in water is something that's so difficult for garlic to withstand. And so I'll show you photos of what I mean. Just creating mounds, it just a few inches, getting the roots out of sitting water is such a good way of protecting your garlic from drowning in the winter months. And the mounding also raises soil temperature in the spring. So the garlic can get an extra push in the springtime. It'll be warmer in those mounds than it will be in the alleyways, and your garlic will have a nice jump. Where if you're growing in areas where it's a very hot and dry through the fall, winter, spring, then you would want to not mound. You would grow your garlic in the flat rather than mounding. So that would be in some areas of the interior, in the Okanagan, where water supply is an actual issue, then you wouldn't raise. But here where I am, we do raise our soil. Before planting, I apply about 2 inches of steer. I recommend steer cow manure if you can, or horse manure if you can get it. Horse manure is not quite as high in nitrogen as steer manure. Chicken manure, if you can find that much chicken manure, is even better, but I know much harder to find. So I put down a couple of inches of steer, and I do that before we mound so that it's mixed in with the soil, and the soil organisms have a chance to start breaking it down. And it's sitting at where the roots of the garlic would be able to absorb some of those nutrients. Okay. And I will just, so I hope you can see in this photo, this was an old garlic bed of mine growing actually in Richmond many years ago. So no formal, sides on that bed. You don't need to put wood or anything. You just need to raise the soil so that there's good drainage and the bed can warm up nicely. So this is a great, place, or a great way to grow garlic. Now that I'm growing garlic in a little bit larger quantity, we don't raise the soil quite as high as this. It's maybe 2 to 3 inches. This looks closer 6 to 8, which is awesome, but a lot more work. So we've got a little bit of compromise where we are now. So before I go on, does that make sense to everybody? Raising your bed and why you want to do that? Putting your manure or your nutrients down before you bake the bed so that it's incorporated in a good spot for the roots to get it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Arzeena. And related to that, we have a question about your opinion on goat manure and also no-till, and a question on planting in big pots.
Okay, goat manure would be fantastic. So if that's what you've got to, and you've got an ample supply, put that down for sure in the bed. Your second question, sorry, was?
Second question was about no-till, and if you're a no-till gardener, how do you approach things?
Okay, that's going to be a bit of a challenge with making mounds, because obviously that requires some movement of soil. So, what I do often is, in most of my farm, we have permanent raised beds where, the beds are made once, and then after that, we don't go through and rototill and break the beds down again. So yes, it does require some initial movement of soil, but once those beds are in, that's, that would probably do very well for this person who wants to try and minimize tillage. The only issue then is how to incorporate the nutrients into the root zone where the garlic is. So either that might require you to just do some forking with either a broad fork or a pitchfork, just to sort of penetrate if you're putting manure down on the top, get it into the soil a little bit more so it's not sitting at the top of the bed. That would probably be the only kind of thing that pops to mind, is having those nutrients down just a little bit deeper to where the cloves are going to be sitting. And then lastly, garlic growing in pots. I have never had success trying to grow garlic in pots. There's a couple of reasons that I think what happens for me anyways. The pot size needs to be so large for garlic for a few reasons. Garlic can't withstand the soil drying out at all. So if you think of what the temperatures usually are like in June, in early July, having the pot, fairly moist consistently is really important. The other reason is that in pots, your nutrients generally run out after about 6 or 7 weeks, even in a really large pot. Every time you water, you start to leach nutrients out, and they leak out. Rather than in soil, they kind of move down a little bit lower, but they don't leave the way they do in pots. So I find garlic in pots tends to be very small. It can still be grown, but you won't get large bulbs. You might want to try half barrels. That would probably be the size that it's possible to grow garlic. Remembering that you want to be planting your garlic 6 inches, which is kind of like this width, right? So you're not going to get a lot of garlic in a pot or a container, but that's the kind of size that you would want to go after if that's what you're thinking, if that's your only choice. Yeah.
And we do have someone saying that she has grown them successfully that way. That's Michelle mentioning that. Arzeena, a question about, does the manure need to be composted aged manure?
Always. Yeah. And sorry, I didn't mention that. Yeah, you always want to deal with a minimum of 1-year-old manure, never fresh manure or anything that's really less than 6 months, unless you know that grower has turned that pile religiously for every 2 to 3 days and gotten rid of the issue. Really is the E. coli and the pathogens that can sometimes be in fresh manure. Composting, the introduction of air into manure is what breaks down all of those pathogens and creates that really rich, sort of more soil-like substance, rather than kind of when it comes out the back end of a cow, it's still on the green side. And that's not what you want to see in your soil. You want it to be aged so that some of those aid the pathogens, but also fresh manure has a high quantity of ammonia, hence the smell. And ammonia in soil is not a good thing to have happen. So having it compost is really good. So 1 or even 2-year-old aged manure, that if you can get. Yeah.
And it's easy to compost your own, isn't it? By just keeping it piled up for a few years, adding some carbon to it maybe.
Absolutely.
A question from James for you, Arzeena. Wanting to know, are you a fan of to provide additional feeding to the garlic? And earlier he did comment that it's sometimes recommended to do a second feeding in March. Do you do that?
Absolutely. Yes, we do. And I learned that the hard way by not having that done a couple of times. And just with the rains that we get, most of the nutrients that, you put down now by March time, they do leak away, and garlic really would benefit from we then do a liquid feed. We do one in early April, and then one again in May, and then shut it off. So yes, I will come back to that, so that folks, I know this is a lot of information coming right at you. So yes, we'll go into that. So I just want to backtrack a little bit. Siting and prepping the area that you're going to plant garlic. If everyone's okay with that, raising the bed or not, depending on where you are in the world and where your garden is, really important. So if you haven't done that yet, now would be the time to get that ready before you plant your garlic. When the bed is ready, like we're going to now just go through a step-by-step process of how you plant garlic. For those of you who have never done this before, you generally don't want to crack open your garlic, and you certainly wouldn't want to see this in your garlic. Sorry, I pulled this off of the internet. But pulling apart the garlic should be done no more than 2 or 3 days before planting. You probably know this as if any of you are cooking. Once you open up a garlic bulb, the cloves are very susceptible then to start to dry out. And that's not what you want to have happen in good planting garlic. So you wait until kind of the last minute as much as possible to crack open your bulbs. When you separate them, keep the skins on. This is not the time to be peeling your skins. The skins are really important for protecting the garlic through the winter months, especially. Garlic has an up and a down. So similar to tulip bulbs and other flower bulbs, the pointy end is the end where the tip comes out of. The flat end is the end where the roots come out of. If you accidentally plant your clove upside down, and that has happened to me a few times, because often, well, sometimes what happens is when you put it in the hole, if you've got a deep hole, as it falls in, it can turn upside down. What will happen is the tip will come out the bottom, and then it will right itself up and have this hook in the stem. The roots will be higher in the soil than they should be, closer to the surface where they can tend to dry out. And in general, you won't get a good sized bulb, and it certainly won't be marketable because it's got this hook in it. It'll still grow. I mean, it's amazing how determined garlic is to make a bulb. So it will grow, but it won't be as good as it could be. So you'll lose a lot of potential if you accidentally put it upside down. So do remember that garlic has an up and a down. And as I mentioned before, garlic would prefer to be planted 6 inches apart. So, if you don't have, a way to measure in your garden, just, between your thumb and pinky, that's usually about 6 inches. And I like to have the garlic a minimum of 2 inches down so that the bottom end is I like when I'm holding it, I like to have, my second knuckle pushed into the soil level. Does that make sense? So the bottom of the garlic may even be close to 3 inches, but it's nice and deep and down in the soil. And don't worry about putting it, too, like you don't want to obviously stick your whole hand in, but, between 2 and 3 inches, that's totally fine. Because even on top of that, I'm going to be putting mulch on top. There is enough energy in that garlic bulb to get it through quite a lot. So don't worry about putting it too deep. The one thing is that you don't want the garlic to be too shallow. Because like I mentioned, garlic doesn't like drying out. Its roots are fairly shallow, like as it grows. When you harvest garlic, often you just see like a mass of very thin, fine roots, close to the bulb. That's generally garlic roots are fairly shallow down. So they can be very susceptible to drying out, which is why you want to have your roots nice and deep where the soil is more moist, more evenly moist, all the time. And I hope that doesn't sound contradictory because I just mentioned in the other slide, not having your roots in water. Yes, so not too wet and not too dry. Like I said, a bit of a princess. There's the other fairy tale that's, coming up, that it's not too hard and not too soft, but somewhere in between where it has enough water, but it's not standing in water. Okay, now we're not quite finished. You've planted your garlic. It's, it's been separated and 6 inches apart, a couple of inches down. Don't just leave the garlic beds that you're not done. You want to then cover those beds with something. And the reason for that is any bare soil, Mother Nature abhors bare soil. She will fill it with something that you generally don't want, quote unquote, weeds that will be either blown in or that are already in the soil will take off. So what you want to do is cover that soil with any kind of material you can get your hands on, be it leaves. And now it's a perfect time to go scrounging around your neighborhood. If people have done you the favor of raking up their leaves and putting in bags at the end of the driveway, you grab those leaves. Straw, that's what we use on our farm because we have to use quite a large quantity, and me driving around the Comox Valley with my car full of leaf bags, it doesn't work. So we use straw. Even something like coffee grounds or seaweed, these two things are both basically seed free generally, but just they're biodegradable material that goes on top of the soil. It's playing two functions now. It's protecting the soil from weeds growing up, but it also will act as a mulch to keep moisture in. Because as I mentioned before, I don't irrigate garlic, and having that layer of straw or leaves or whatever, it's amazing the difference it makes versus bare ground come the spring months when the soil starts to dry out. The soil under a heavy mulch is moist, and the garlic has no moisture stress whatsoever by putting that mulch down. So that's what we've done. And it's helped to grow some big garlic. Mind you, yeah, the discussion we just had about garlic not drying down, we'll see, like come June, middle of June, late June, if I'm seeing that it's not looking like it's drying out, and the last couple of seasons this has happened, we may actually have to rake that garlic or the mulch off just to allow the bulbs some more drying down time. Yeah, all these things that I'm still learning, about things that I might have to adjust to grow garlic better. But for now, we put the mulch down, and fingers crossed, it stops raining heavily sometime in June. Yeah, that's the ideal. Now, come spring, or, depending where you are, you might even see this by Christmas time, you'll start to see the little shoots of garlic, and they're reaching for the sun and getting some photosynthesis, and that the garlic is actively growing. And so now is the time. This is when the garlic really will start to take off. Now it will want to be fed again. And you can either put a couple of more inches of manure down, or whatever fertilizer that you're using, if that's what you have. I prefer to, because we're also growing in such quantity, I use a liquid fish fertilizer, with a backpack sprayer, and we spray that on top of the garlic once in, like I said, April, and then once again in May. If you were using manure or another solid fertilizer, you would just have to put it down once. Liquid fertilizers tend to wash away and be used up very quickly. So that's why we do the split, April and then May application again. I think I saw that someone had their hand up.
Yeah, I was just had a question about seaweed for mulch. Do you soak it in fresh water or rinse it to get rid of the salts before putting it down as a mulch?
Yeah, good question. Not on the coast. The rains that we have wash away all the salts. So you don't have to worry about salt buildup or it impacting the salts, impacting the garlic at all. If you were ever using seaweed indoors, like in a greenhouse, or in a pot that was sheltered and wasn't getting rained on, then yes, I would wash off the salt then. But outside, it's very safe to use either on top of the soil for garlic. I also use seaweed around my fruit trees. It's got a very high potassium, so fruiting plants love it. So yeah, good question.
Arzeena, just a quick couple of questions that have come in the last few minutes. Linda was just asking again about needing to rotate, and I've answered that for you, Linda, that not to plant year after year. Arzeena has taught us. 4-year rotation was what Arzeena recommended. Linda's other question has to do with what previous type of veggie would be okay to have in your garden bed before you plant your garlic. So
sure.
Do you suggest following with garlic after any certain stuff or not?
Yeah.
Planting?
Garlic is a heavy feeder, and I've mentioned that already. So generally what we try and do, it's not always possible, is to go between light feeding crops or plants and heavy feeding. So the light feeding crops I find are anything like most of the greens, so lettuce, spinach, Even kale is a fairly light feeding crop. It doesn't extract a lot of nutrients from the soil. So anything in that family, and then followed by garlic. And then even after the garlic, something a little bit lighter feeding as well is generally recommended. Beans and peas would be another good choice because again, they will have added a few nutrients into the soil that would help the following garlic or after garlic. So yeah, great question. That's what I would recommend, having those types of crops either before or after.
Yeah, it is a great question. Thanks for that, Linda. And a couple of people are asking about more details on the fertilizer you recommend specifically. How about Gaia Green, alfalfa, liquid kelp? What are your opinions on those?
You know, as much as possible, I like to use a solid fertilizer in soil. I find, you know, the soil responds so much better to having those nutrients mixed into it and having the microorganisms take some time to break it down and slowly release it for the garlic. I mean, it's amazing how much root mass the garlic puts on through the winter time. And so that garlic is absorbing nutrients slowly. Having something like putting down a liquid fish in the fall, I think would not be super helpful because any liquid fertilizer will pretty much wash away and you don't get the slow release. Now, we use manure because we have access to some of that. But if you are using something like a Gaia Green or alfalfa pellets, that's another great choice as well. Gaia Green generally would have something like a 4-4-4, like a balanced fertilizer. Putting that down, now to try and get the ratio is a little bit tough. Like I said, you know, manure is a little bit forgiving. And if I say 2 inches, like that's kind of average over an area. The Gaia Green's fairly concentrated and it is expensive. So for that, instead of putting it across the whole bed, what I would probably do is make the rills, like where the rows where you're probably going to be planting your garlic, and placing that fertilizer in those furrows before, like either under the garlic or, you know, before you've planted the garlic, scratching that in. So that would be my suggestion. And let's see, I'm trying to think of what the rate is. It's about 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So let me think about how much, you know, of a Gaia Green to put in. Similarly with alfalfa pellets, if you're going to make a fertilizer using something like alfalfa pellets or alfalfa meal, just be aware that it's high in nitrogen, but it doesn't have a high enough amount of phosphorus and potassium, and should probably be mixed in with other sources like rock phosphate or bone meal, if you're comfortable using bone meal, like a kelp meal or a green sand. So, you know, there is a very general recipe for putting that together, and it's and I'll say it slowly so that folks can write this down. If this is something that you want to do, make your own organic fertilizer. You want to use 4 parts of a seed meal, and that could be alfalfa meal, soy meal, flaxseed meal. There's a number of meals, so they're solid fertilizers. So 4 parts of the nitrogen, the seed meal, to 1 part of phosphorus, be that bone meal or rock phosphate, and then half a part of either kelp meal or green sand. So 4, 1, and a half. And that's generally the ratio that most plants need. They need a lot of nitrogen, a little less phosphorus, and a small amount of potassium. So mix that all together and then do the similar, put it in the rills, like I said, for the Gaia Green. And yeah, that should be good to go.
Okay, I'm just writing this up as you're speaking. The 1/2 part again for the potassium, what's the potassium source?
It can be either a kelp meal, like a seaweed meal, or there's a product called green sand. And it's actually sand that's had ancient beds of kelp kind of dissolve into it, and it's colored the sand green, but it releases potassium. Yeah, comes from New Jersey apparently. So big deposit in New Jersey. All right, so is that okay for, we've talked about the fertility and when to put it, at planting time. And then again, when the plant starts growing actively is when garlic will need another boost of some type of fertility. Yeah, okay. Now, as the plant grows, you're going to see, leaves, all these luscious leaves, and then come around the early part of June, if you are growing a hardneck, you will start to see scapes forming. And those are those delicious curlicue pieces of stem. And then the end is actually a flower. And I'm of the opinion that it's best to break those scapes off. Some folks leave them on. I think that's a waste of good eating, quite frankly. I love scapes. We sell a lot of scapes off of this farm. So we break them off as an extra crop. By June, we're pretty desperate for fresh garlic. I freeze a lot of garlic and I make garlic scape powder. So that's what gets us through April, May, early June. So by that time, I want some fresh, something juicy that has that garlic flavor. So I break it off. I wait till the scape forms at least one curl because I'm greedy and I want more eating. If you can wait for 2 curls, that's even better, more eating. Yeah, and then there's a point at which the scape starts to get tough. So you want to make sure you're on top of it and, breaking it off where it's tender and eating it. Once it's snapped off, it stores in your crisper or in your cooler for a very long time, more than a month I've done it. So yeah, have it in your cooler and then you've got garlic flavor for a while to keep you at least until your garlic's ready to be harvested. So another bonus. Yeah, so you can chop them to use in stir fries, curries, wherever you would want the garlic flavor, wherever you want that kind of a green bean / asparagus-y type of vegetable in whatever recipe, pakoras or whatever. It's the uses are pretty endless. They do make great pickles and they do make great pesto too. We could probably spend a whole webinar on just all the recipes for using this. It's pretty fantastic. So yeah, I try not to waste the scapes and use them up. Now, then it comes time to figuring out when is your garlic ready to harvest. And this is, it can be a bit of a science. It can be a bit of an art. I can't say I'm a total expert in it, but here goes. Most garlic is ready to be harvested sometime in July. And there's a few ways that you can figure out when your garlic is ready. I have to say with hardneck garlics, it's a little bit easier because there is a little trick that I'm going to tell you that another longtime garlic grower in Richmond taught me. And what she said is with any variety of garlics, you'll notice that the scapes form at different times. There's timing differences between the different varieties, but with all your garlics, if you can leave at least one scape on, what happens is they curl into that curlicue and then they uncurl and then stand straight up. And when that happens, that garlic variety is ready to pull. So I was like, oh, that's so awesome. But as it would happen, sometimes we get volunteers coming to the farm to help us do the scape breaking, because there's 12,000 of them. It's always nice to have many hands. And sometimes they're super efficient at it and they forget to leave one. And then you're like hooped, right? If you're depending on that tip. And alternatively, if you're growing a softneck or an elephant garlic, there's no scape to tell you what to do. So the other indicator is the color of the leaves. So if you can see in the photo, on the left are the fully green leaves. And as you move down the plant, they're starting to turn yellow. And right at the bottom of the plant, they are fully brown. You want to see 2 brown leaves. There'll actually be more than 2, but When you can see 2 fully shriveled up leaves, that's usually the time that that garlic is ready. You don't want to wait till the whole plant is brown. It's too late, and I'll tell you what happens if you wait that long. You want the bottom 2 leaves to be fully brown, and then it's time to start forking and yanking that garlic out. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm just going to pause there because it's an important one.
Yeah, I think everybody gets
Okay.
that, but it's so wonderful to hear. Do you really grow 12,000 heads of garlic?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
And that's not, I know another garlic grower who's doing 2 acres. Like that's what, 60,000+. Yeah, we're small. What happens if you wait too long? So, okay, here's the thing. The longer you wait, the bigger the bulbs get, right? So this is the temptation, is to wait, just a little bit longer. I want them to fatten up. If you wait too long, what happens is, those leaves that are drying, we're going to go back to that thing that the garlic bulb is actually the bottom of the leaf, right? And the leaves drying is actually forming those protective wrappers around the garlic. Now, if they get too dry, or if the bulb starts to get so big, what will happen is the wrapper leaves will separate. Can you guys see this? What's happened here? Here is a garlic, and we don't sell this garlic when it's split like this. The wrapper leaves elsewhere, it was fine, but on this side, it's split. So either this garlic was left in the ground too long and the wrapper leaves opened, or the bulb got too big and it split the leaf. Regardless, that type of garlic, it's perfectly delicious, great for eating. We'll eat it, we'll keep that until December, but it will not store a long time. And for selling, you don't want to have split garlic. You could use that garlic for seed. Nothing wrong with this, using this for seed. There's no disease on it. It's just the wrappers have split. If the cloves are a good size, and these are actually not a bad size, you could use that as a seed clove, but it's not your storage and eating garlic.
Hey, Arzeena, not everybody saw that up close.
Okay.
Can you put that right in front of your camera again? There you go. Thank you.
So see how it's open? You can actually see the clove there. You don't want that. You want all your garlic, you don't want to be able to see inside and see individual cloves. You want these are layers of the wrapper leaves that were the green leaves in the garlic have, layered and created a protective sheath around the cloves, right? That's what generally garlic is. When they open and split, it allows air to come in, and that's when the cloves start to dry out. So often what happens when garlic is left in the ground too long, it splits. And that's the issue that you want to try and avoid, especially if you want to have garlic stored. So, and here's the thing. With softneck garlics, I find it's very, very easy to wait too long and then they split. And then the whole reason for growing them has just been, they don't store. And so, this is what happens for me. I guess I'm just waiting too long. Most softnecks are actually ready a couple of weeks before hardneck garlics, and my timing is just that. I miss it. And then, they're harvested with the hardnecks, and then, it's past their time. So big sigh. Yeah. Sorry. So timing, any questions on when to pull your garlic up? Does that make sense? So the bottom 2 leaves, or when your scape is standing up, those are the times. And it's going to be sometime in about July. Okay. Now, once it's been pulled up out of the ground, you don't want to leave it there. You want to cure it. And we talked about that at the beginning of the webinar, that taking the moisture out of the garlic is really, really important. Garlic is quite wet when it's first pulled up. As I hope folks have had a chance to eat fresh garlic. Have you ever eaten it when it's pulled out of the ground? You know, the papers are rubbery. They're not, you know, dry and flaky like this. The garlic itself is extremely juicy. Like it's quite something. It's very different than, you know, when it's dry down. Maybe not quite as hot and spicy, but still super juicy. But all that juice is something that fungus like, you know, they're all that water, the freely available water. And garlic has a fair amount of sugars in it too. So you want to get rid of that moisture as quickly as you can. And so what you're wanting to do now is what's called curing your garlic. You are trying to get it, all that moisture to evaporate. So generally what you want to do is bundle your garlic and then hang it somewhere out of the sun, but where air can flow around, especially the bulb itself, and evaporate all of that moist, the excess moisture that's in the garlic, and especially in the wrapper leaves. That's generally where you're trying to take the moisture out of so that they can form those nice tight sheaths around the cloves. It takes, you know, a minimum, I would say, of 3 weeks. I should change this because now I'm finding, you know, with our wet springs, it can take even 5 weeks or more, just with passive hanging up in, you know, in a barn or in a shed where there's airflow. So I'm going to give you some examples of how you can do this. You know, at a home-based level, these are some options for you. Bundling and then hanging your garlic either on nails or, you know, on string, anywhere where you can have air flowing around the bulbs. If you've got like a grated metal table like this, then you can hang your garlic, or in this case, it's onions, horizontally, but only if there's airflow coming through. So a regular table that's not meshed would not be good for garlic. The one side of it will not cure properly. The wrappers will still stay moist. You want to avoid that. So hanging it up is probably what most people will do. And I don't know if folks have, you know, some tips. We have a big barn at our farm and we hang the garlic in the rafters. We bundle it up like in the photo and then sort of separate it up and hang it on our rafters. I've seen many people use like a clothesline in their garage and hang it on the clothesline. Yeah, those are just some ideas of how you can get it. And in fact, finding space to cure your garlic, the growing of the garlic sometimes is the easy part. Figuring out where you're going to cure it and how you're going to hang all this garlic is often like the headache. So yeah, be warned, if you are going to be growing garlic in quantity, make sure you remember to provide space for, like, you know, unless you've got some neighbors who are willing to trade you space for garlic, maybe to hang in their garages. The only thing about garages, do note that there's not a lot of airflow. So if you're going to hang it in a contained space, like a room, like a garage, you're probably going to need to put a fan so that air is flowing around and move. You need air movement. You can't just have stagnant air. It won't pull the moisture out fast enough. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this in the early part. Here are some of my suggested varieties of what I've grown successfully before, and what's done well for me for this climate area. These are the varieties that I've had success growing. You know what? Generally, if my recommendation is to find a garlic grower close to you, because whatever they're growing, whatever variety they're growing, and you know the garlic looks good, that would probably grow really well for you too. So it's adapted to your climate and the soils in your area. One of the reasons I really like music / Susan Delafield is that it will withstand the wetness that we have here at our farm. I've tried growing, you know, there's hundreds of varieties, and I've tried growing some of the more spicier, hotter varieties like Tibetan and Georgian Fire. They like literally, grow, this is like the size of the bulb. And literally I started with a clove that big, and that's about the size of the bulb that came out of the ground, and grown the exact same way as all the other varieties that I grew. My music is beautiful and fat, and these ones are tiny. And the only thing I can think of is it just doesn't like the wetness that we have. So yeah. If anyone has any other favorite varieties, yeah, feel free to put them in the chat too. But yeah, this is what worked for us. And then sources of seed garlic. Like I mentioned, your own bioregion, wherever you're growing, is probably the best place to grow it now. We have in the Comox Valley a garlic festival in around late August every year. And in some regions around the province, you also have your own garlic festival. If you don't, you should start one, because I can tell you, when people hear that there is a garlic festival, they come out in droves. It's a fantastic way of bringing thousands of people around. So at our garlic festival, there's probably now a dozen different garlic growers who sell garlic, and they've got variety names. So that's always an important thing, to know the type of garlic that you're planting, so that you can look it up and you can show off to your friends that you've got a named garlic variety. Your local garden center, especially if they are also bringing in local garlic to sell as seed. Because some garden centers kind of sell these packaged garlics that who knows where they've come from. But if you can see the farm name, or if it says local, I mean, I trust that when it says local, it is actually local. That's another good source. So if you don't have a garlic festival, I guess second under that should be your own farmer's market. Many farms who grow seed garlic will bring it to the farmer's market. And then you have a chance to talk to them about why this garlic, or what kind it is. Does it grow well here? Does it need any special treatment? And most importantly, have you seen any disease in your garlic? What you want to specifically ask them for is, have you had white rot on your farm before? And unfortunately, I can't remember who asked this. That is the disease that you want to be so afraid of if you are a garlic lover and want to be growing garlic for a long time. Once it's in your soil, estimates are that it will be there for 20 years. If you get that disease, you're kind of hooped. It's a little bit like, what is that fungus in brassicas? Clubroot. It just stays in your soil. You don't even have to grow garlic for 10 years, but in the 11th year, you try it and there it will come back again. So once you have it, it's awful. You can't really grow garlic again. And yeah, who wants to not be able to grow garlic? I find in our area, a lot of great garlic growers are selling their garlic on Facebook Marketplace. And so that's another place that you can interact with the garlic grower and ask them a few questions. And then lastly, if there's just nobody in your area growing garlic and you can't find local garlic, I've just put on a couple of places in BC that are high quality, test their garlic for disease and viruses. Boundary Garlic is in the Kootenays in Boundary, and Rasa Creek Garlic. And I forgot to put the website, but if you Google Rasa Creek, they're quite a famous garlic grower and will hopefully be able to supply you. I have not used them for a number of years, so hopefully all is still well with all those two suppliers. But if anyone else has any good supply sources, do tell, because it's always good to hear where else you can find garlic. I'm a member of a seed co-op called the BC Eco Seed Cooperative. And I do know we are just onboarding a garlic grower. So if you, again, can't find it in your region, if you can Google BC Eco Seed Co-op, there is a grower now who is selling. She's the one who I know who's got 2 acres of garlic and has multiple varieties. And yeah. With the problems that we had with our garlic, I decided, especially with the Susan Delafield, the Red Russian was fine, by the way. The Susan didn't do so well. I have bought my garlic from her. So we just put in a an order for 40 kgs of garlic, a lot of garlic. It was expensive, sadly, but you know, that was the price, and we needed to start from fresh. So that's what we did. Yeah. So I'll open it now up for questions again, and hopefully I answered some of those questions early on in the workshop. And if I didn't, now, like, feel free to repeat them. Apologies if I've forgotten what they are.
Thank you, Arzeena. You've done a remarkable job. I always learn so much. A couple little questions here before we say bye-bye, because we're just about a few minutes beyond our time. Kitty's asking, any remedy for getting rid of wireworms in a veggie bed?
Grow garlic. The funny thing is, yes, you know, wireworm will try and pierce through garlic and take a bite. You'll get a little spot, but quite frankly, the pungency of the garlic makes the wireworm retreat, and they don't do, you know, anything to it. So grow garlic, grow brassicas. Those are the two types of crops that they don't like. And after a couple of years, usually the wireworm numbers start to go down. So we actually use garlic as our first crop when we're plowing under hay or grass. If in your garden, garlic will withstand high wireworm pressure. And then after that, a brassica. And then usually by year 3, the numbers are down. That you may not be able to grow potatoes, but you can do something else like carrots or even salad. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. And Michelle had a specific question about a kind of garlic that she grew. Before you answer that, I just want to remind everyone that we want to provide a very generous honorarium to Arzeena, because she has provided such a generosity of an abundance of information. Thank you so much. Information many of us have not really had access to anywhere else. I've made notes of some things I have never read or seen elsewhere, and I've been growing garlic for about 20 years. So I just want to remind you that this is based on the gift economy, and what you share is shared with Arzeena, and we want to reward her for her time and give her the generous honorarium that she more than deserves. And I've posted in the chat how you can send an e-transfer to lucretia.schanfarber@gmail.com. You can also just private message me on Facebook or here now. And no, Janet, you're asking, do the e-transfers require a question? No, they will be deposited automatically, and you will be smiled upon by the garlic gods with every one of your donations. So thank you so much for making sure that we gift back to Arzeena for the incredible presentation. So Michelle's question had to do with purple stripe garlic, and that it looked like an imperfection on her Chinese purple stripe may have repeated on other heads. Are there genetic conditions that make this happen?
Yes, it's so fascinating. And thanks, Lynn. The purpling in garlic is very much conditional to the soils. So I'm finding that as well. The white porcelain garlic that I started with, the music and the Susan Delafield, I am now getting purple streaks in. So I wouldn't call it an imperfection or a deformity. It's just something that happens in the interaction of your garlic with your soil, and it doesn't happen to everybody. But just on some farms and in some conditions, the purpling shows up. I find, as a commercial garlic grower, people actually like the purpling. They equate purple in garlic to stronger flavor. So it's worked for us. And in fact, I separated out. So Susan Delafield is a very white porcelain garlic. And the ones that were starting to show striping, I separated them out. I grew them again, and they stayed purple and they stayed striped. So this is kind of just something that garlic can sometimes develop the coloring. And yeah, that's just done so well.
And is there actually a flavor difference? Is it a little stronger? No,
I don't find so. No,
we
I
just
think it's
like the color purple.
yeah, I think that's it. We just like that coloring. So it's, you know, I love researching about garlic, and I just read that scientists did like a DNA search on, you know, there's hundreds of garlic types when you look around and do searches on different websites, but they've actually found there's only 10 different types of garlic. They're all related to each other in some way. And often what happens is once a grower has grown garlic for about 10 years, I mean, this was always the thing. We felt that it was okay to rename the garlic. We felt it had, you know, adapted to the conditions on our farm. So we renamed it. So we're finding all the hundreds of garlics that we have, there's probably 10, you know, different varieties, but over the years, they've all kind of developed their stories, and which is fine. You know, it's kind of cool.
It's so fascinating. I'm just amazed at how much there is to learn and to know and to share. We should wrap it up here now. I always love to give our guest teachers the final parting words. What do you have to say to us, Arzeena, as we go forward and start planting our garlic in the next few weeks?
Just enjoy. You know, garlic is so satisfying to grow. Lucretia has a beautiful video of her harvesting the garlic, and it has to be one of the most satisfying things. And that's what the part that keeps me going through some of the initial work that you have to do to get it planted. And so just enjoy garlic. It's a beautiful crop to have. I try and be garlic self-sufficient, and it's totally possible. Be it a combination of fresh garlic and dried or frozen. So I never have to buy garlic from the supermarket. So I hope we can all work towards that. We really shouldn't be importing garlic here. So, yeah.
Fabulous parting words. Enjoy your garlic. Learn to be garlic self-sufficient. That is my new goal. Thank you, Arzeena. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Arzeena, it's always a wonderful, wonderful pleasure to learn from you. We look forward to your next garden teaching session with us. We were talking about doing another one in the spring, but that's a long way off, a carrot growing or a root crop growing session. But I think we need to do quite a few more throughout the winter. I hope you're game for that.
I'm game, totally.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Arzeena. We really appreciate you showing up. We look forward to seeing you again. Keep watch on our Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page. That's where you'll see where our next events are coming up. I usually say go out and get dirty, but you'd have to go out in the dark. So tomorrow, go outside and get dirty. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye now.
Thanks for joining. Bye-bye. Lovely to meet you there, Michelle. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, James, for all your questions. See you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks again.